I'm Michael Bungay-Stania, just in case we haven't met before. And this is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather, the BS, and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you're a transformational leader and if you're seeking modern change mastery, you are in exactly the right place. So this is our first returning guest. You met David Lancefield in episode 12, which is called What Are Your Top 3 Decisions? Now, David's an advisor to CEOs, and I think is particularly brilliant about strategy. I mean, not the old school strategy that you heard, say, Charles Conn be dismissive about in episode 22. That's a great episode, by the way. But a way of being strategic that is appropriate in these fluid, confusing, destabilizing times. Now, David writes a terrific newsletter. You can sign up at davidlancefield.com. I recommend that you do. And one of them was so good, I asked him to record it for us as a bonus Change Signal episode. Now, you'll like this, I think. It's about being a systems leader. What does that even mean? And it is a terrific mix of both the theoretical and the practical. And perhaps have a pen and paper standing by. There's a really good mapping exercise that he recommends midway through. And for me, at least, these things are better understood by drawing them out. Here's David.
Hi, I'm David Lancefield, and I want to talk about systems leadership. I imagine many of you might think that that's a rather esoteric, conceptual concept or practice, maybe not relevant to you. Well, I'm here to say it is. And actually, I'd say most, if not all leaders, are systems leaders, whether they like it or not. Yes, we do think of system leaders as people who tackle the larger societal issues that we face, not just of their own organisation, and often people who collaborate extensively and productively with others. They're typically visionaries. They're also very resilient to the challenges they face, conscious with humility that they don't have the answers, and they certainly won't have the solutions on their own. Well, that is a way to describe them, and that is classically the definition that we use. But I want to argue that there's more to systems leadership than that. And frankly, it's hard to think of change that Michael's talking about without the systems that organizations, teams, individuals operate within. So let's look at the picture around us at the moment. We are certainly living through a whole series of systemic shocks, whether it's climate instability, whether it's the rise of AI and all the opportunities and perils that come with it, whether it's social inequality that we feel in our communities, whether it's geopolitical conflict. The list goes on. And again, I imagine some people may think, I hear about it, I read about it, but I'm not sure it's relevant to me. Well, I'd like you to take just a moment. Think of your own organisation and pick one of those shocks, developments, trends, disruptions.
If I may interrupt, I'd suggest you jot down a list of 5 or more and then pick one.
And then ask yourself, where and how does it affect our organisation? And I bet it does, whether it's the supply chain you're operating, whether it's some of the people personally affected by conflict, whether it's the risk and the challenge of new competitors, particularly those who are harnessing AI. I bet it's relevant. So for me, the question is not whether systems leadership is relevant or not, whether systems and systemic change is not relevant to me. It's how do I respond wisely, constructively, and yes, you guessed it, strategically. So that's what I want to refer to today and focus on. How do I become a better, more capable, more strategic systems leader, especially when I'm going through a period of change? I want to start with something that Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, amongst his many other roles, that's really stayed with me. He said, less bad is not good enough anymore. That's a provocation right there. So it's certainly not enough to reduce harm slightly, whether it's harm within society, within communities, to the environment, whatever that harm is. Because in complex systems, small fixes to symptoms often let the root causes fester. And if you look at what actually happens in systems, too often we get stuck in just one aspect or one system. For example, we obsessed over team dynamics, team systems, and we completely ignore the organizational context that shapes them. So the team may be performing really well, but the organization becomes really annoyed or frustrated with them. Or we look at this broader system that I've just been talking about and we say, well, it's just too big, or it's not with us, it's not our responsibility. Or the opposite happens actually, where we get overwhelmed by the scale and the complexity of these issues and we freeze. We wait for somebody else to pick up the pieces. Or perhaps we even try to get involved in everything and we spread ourselves too thin. And then we contribute almost nothing. So, one of the reasons that often systems stagnate and our leadership stagnates is that we stay in narrow lanes. We freeze. We get stuck into inertia. Or actually, we do the opposite. We do too much. So let's not do that right now. Let's do the opposite. Let's zoom out and think of 5 interconnected systems that actually you move through every single day, whether you notice it or not. The first one is a very personal one, and it's your inner system. It's your mindset, the way you think, your energy, the identity you have, the beliefs that you hold. So perhaps if you are directly affected by one of these systemic shocks, start here. Think about how you're managing yourself, how you're being kind to yourself, how you're reacting to awful or difficult moments, whether they affect you directly or through members of your family or people in the community you care about. How do you use something like, for example, meditation to create some form of inner peace in the chaos around you? And how are you choosing your words with care and intention? Or perhaps stopping some bad habits that lead you to spiral into despair? Peter Senge, who wrote the book The Fifth Discipline, he calls these mental models. And I actually think these are the deepest leverage points for change. Because it's hard to shift outer systems that we'll come onto if your inner one is stuck. The second one I would talk about is your relational system. That could be your team at work, your network more generally, your professional network, your collaborators, or perhaps people in your community, in your neighborhood. So, say in that first case I talk about, say you process something internally, something's happened in the system, good or bad. And perhaps you spent the time to make sense of it. You've reframed it. You thought deeply about it. Now the question is, do you raise that topic with your team? And often when you know people well, there's an element of trust between you. The obvious answer is yes. Well, that's not always right. Sometimes it pays to put some distance between you and the topic or the issue and ask the question, is it truly relevant to them? Or is it actually just all about something you need to focus on? And actually, does it deserve airing because of anxiety you sense in others, or are you actually projecting your own fears? This takes wisdom, it takes care for other people, and also clarity about what you want them to do with it and what you'd value from them. The third system is organizational. That's all about how your organization's structured, how the culture works, how the incentives help or hinder you, how the strategy guides you in a certain direction, and how decisions would be made, the typical things you'd expect in an organization. So when you're looking at these big systemic shocks or developments, you might ask the question, what's our organization doing? What's it saying? What's its stance on the topic? And what signals is it sending the outside world or inside world to, implicitly or explicitly? And are we incentivized to do the right thing, say the right thing, or are we saying one thing outside and actually encouraged to do quite the opposite or something more short term? And then coming back to you, asking the question, what influence do I have, even if it's modest, to shape the response of the organization? This is a classic place within your organization where we often assume that it's someone else's responsibility to pick up the slack, to contribute, to say something, perhaps because they're further up the organization chart or they have more power or influence than you or you think you do. But actually that can be limiting too. You may be an expert on a particular topic. You may care about it and have experience of that issue more than others. And perhaps they're waiting for you, knowing this, but you're both too scared or afraid to take the first move. Another system I'd call out explicitly is technology. And of course, we're all focused on AI, but that's only one form of technology. There are many other forms out there. And it raises big questions of how do we harness it, use it wisely? How do we mitigate the risks of bias and bad use? And how does it help us think deeper, better, in some cases faster? Where are the limits? Where do we make the calls? And that's part of it. Where do we make the calls on big systemic changes augmented, enhanced by AI and other technologies? How do we get ourselves in a space where we can actually trust our wisdom whilst also infused with the best insights that technology can give us? So they're not just functional decisions about the use of technology, they're ethical questions and they're strategic questions. Because these systems, these technology systems, do actually over time embed new ways of thinking, new values. They shift power also. And they also alter who gets heard. And of course, the fifth system, the one I started with this in the conversation, the societal and the ecological systems that we're part of. This is the big one. This is our climate. This is our society, the norms, the institutions that govern us, the markets that we operate in, particularly the financial markets. And of course, you might be thinking, well, that's just too big, too complex. I'm just one person. So again, how can I shape this? But I would say to you, you're never outside these systems. Look at your day-to-day life. You actually shape these systems in every policy you support, locally, regionally, nationally, even internationally. Whether that's support through a vote, whether it's your voice, or perhaps bringing it back to earth, whether it's the product or services you buy, or the conversations you have with people close to you or far to you. So there are some strategic questions about the role you play in these big systemic issues. Are you a bystander? Are you a steward? Are you a custodian? Are you a shaper? Are you a catalyst? And here's a simple tool I use with my clients and in workshops. I draw 5 concentric rings, starting with inner, then relational, organizational, technological, and societal and ecological. And place a real challenge that you're grappling with in the center. Just think of that challenge that you're worried about, optimistic about perhaps. And then ask for each of those rings, what's going on here? What are the forces at play here? What are the loops, the blockers, the blind spots? And also importantly, what am I not seeing here? Perhaps because I've been too close, too stuck, or too narrow in my view. That's your system map. It won't give you necessarily the answer, but it will paint a broader, deeper picture of the terrain that you're operating in. Let's move on to listening. Listening in systems. And I'd say that's different from just your own listening. You're not just hearing yourself in terms of what your inner voice might be telling you, or listening to members of your team or those around you, perhaps in your family or in your community. It's actually hearing what's missing, what's not being said, what are the truths that we're avoiding, what's being diluted. Perhaps we're waiting for clarity. Perhaps we're looking for consensus where there isn't any. But actually in systems, silence is rarely, if never, neutral. And if you're silent, if you turn your back, if you do nothing, actually you're complicit in what may become. So here's your challenge. Think of one system, just one system you're operating in right now, where perhaps you are actually, if you're being truthful with yourself, complicit in sustaining an issue or a stance, or perhaps where you actually have more influence than you're using. And perhaps even more importantly, where a small or smart shift that you could make could ripple across others. And then let's roll our sleeves up, shall we? Then ask yourself, what action could you take? What bold action could you take right now or tomorrow? And who could I partner with within my team, my organization, or outside in a partnership or an alliance you're working with to shift this dynamic? Because actually, when it comes down to it, that's what systems leadership is about. It's not about heroics necessarily. It's not always about vision, certainly not about control. But it is identifying something you think could and should change. It's something about perhaps reducing a friction or spotting a space and then making a connection with either yourself, your inner courage, or with others and making a first move.
To step in as an enthusiastic facilitator, look, I'd make a strong invitation to you to actually do this exercise. I mean, yeah, I know it's always tempting to skip over doing the work. I've done it myself many, many times. But you and I both know that these ideas become much more tangible when you actually apply them to your own reality. So give it a shot. Back to David.
So when I bring all this together, there are 4 points I really, really want to try and convey. The first is avoid getting stuck in one of the systems. We often do. We think, oh, it's all about my team, or actually it's all about the organization. That's my focus. I'm leading this organizational business unit, for example. And we think the bigger picture issues are for somebody else. It's somebody on the board. Well, don't get stuck, because actually in doing your job, in performing your role in the system you're focusing on, actually you need to look at all other 4, all of the 5 together in order to perform your role properly, fully, substantially. So the second one is look for linkages as you do that, because actually most change happens between systems, not just within them. And as I said, think of the third one. Think about your own role. Don't diminish it. You are actually a shaper. You are a catalyst. You're an actor in the system and across these systems. And the fourth, and most of all, focus on your next move. Not a perfect plan, but your next best, most intelligent, wise step that you can take. Because even if it doesn't work, actually you will be moving something. It may be moving yourself forward, maybe sending a signal to other people, maybe encouraging others to make a move forward in tackling whatever the systemic issue or change that you're looking to enable. You see, of course, you can't control all of these systems, especially the bigger picture systems I've alluded to, but you're also not powerless. So the more you see, the more you listen, the more you reflect, and then most importantly, the more you act and act with wisdom, the more likely you are to affect the systemic change that we need, whether that is in the team that we're operating, whether that is in the organization that we're part of, whether it's the society that we're playing a role in, or coming back to you, whether it's actually in your own life as a professional, as a person, as a family member. And as I close, let me leave you with this quote from the eminent systems thinker, Donella Meadows. She said, "The scarcest resource is not oil or clean air. It's our willingness to listen and learn." And with that, I thank you. And thank you for listening.
That was so good. Thanks, David. Now, as well as davidlancefield.com, which I mentioned earlier about his newsletter, I really recommend you connect with him on LinkedIn. He really posts good stuff there. Speaking of LinkedIn, one of the best ways you can support me and this podcast is posting on LinkedIn about a favorite episode. You can include the link directly in your post. I mean, apparently LinkedIn is cool with that these days. And tag me if you do. Hey, thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.